Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our October dialogue. My name's Tom Dennis. I'm the CEO of Serenity and Leadership. We're a premier specialist culture remodeling organization. We help businesses overcome challenges and achieve successful, lasting outcomes whilst always putting people at the heart of the business. We work at a systemic level to understand the core deep-seated issues that present as problems in organizations, and we design and apply targeted interventions to solve them. Our core expertise is identifying and then remodeling cultures, in particular focusing on making them safer, happier, and more inclusive. We believe that the styles of leadership that got us to where we are today are not those that will take us into the future. So we specialize in developing leadership skills for the 2020s. Now, the purpose of these dialogue workshops is to explore some of the more difficult issues around inclusion and to learn something new from each other. In today's session, our focus is challenging the dynamics of racism. And I'm really excited to welcome Raggi here as our guest speaker, and I'll introduce her shortly. We do record these sessions, and we'll send you a link early next week. There'll be two versions, one which will include the dialogue and will be on limited distribution only to those who purchase the ticket. And there'll be a shorter version covering just Raggi's talk, which will be available for anyone to view. It'll be on our website and also our YouTube channel. So the agenda. In a moment, we'll do a check-in, and then we'll listen to Raggi's talk. Then we'll break out into breakout pairs just to help you consolidate just for a moment. It will be quite quick. What you've heard and what you're feeling and what's coming up for you having heard this. Then we'll all come back together and I'll introduce the concept of dialogue and the way that we use it, and then we'll have the dialogue. Towards the end of the session, we'll have a checkout and I'll invite Raggi to conclude from her point of view based on what she's heard. And we will close at 3:30. So, check-in. Really what we'd like to hear is what's your name, what's the work that you do, and how you're feeling now. And as I say, if we can limit it to 30 seconds, that would be great.
Okay, I can go first. Is that okay?
Right off the block. Why not?
So my name is Jurassi. Thank you, Tom. So
Yeah.
My name is Jurassi Antonis. I'm here in Dublin, Ireland. I work in HR recruitment, and also I'm a volunteer in two different non-profit organizations as a HR committee member. So, and we always take an approach in recruitment, in policies, in making sure that we hire the best talents or the best volunteers, and to make sure that we create a diverse inclusion places. Like, I believe every way to see that in a better way, better tools to make sure that we are being equal in our process are more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Right off the get-go there. So Charlotte, can I ask you to, if you would switch on your camera if you can and unmute.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Teal. I am an optimization implementation lead, which doesn't fit on any forms and is very easy to mispronounce for the NHS Business Services Authority. So we work on supporting organisations with workforce systems, but as a sort of separate hat that I wear as part of work is I'm a wellbeing champion for our team and supporting wellbeing across the organisation. So delve into this today to see what good inspiration I can take back to that role.
Fantastic. Well, you're very welcome. Thank you. Angela.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Anigo. I work with the workforce optimization team, just like Charlotte as well, with the NHS BSA. I'm an advisor, and I've got a HR background for a few years before coming into this role. So I'm just here to kind of see what I can take from this session to continue to do what I do, basically.
Thanks, Angela. Ian Dodds. It's great if people can switch on the cameras, unless there's, there's good reason why you don't. But Ian.
Yeah, I'm Ian Dodds. I'm the CEO of Ian Dodds Consulting. And in 2017, we were the Lotus Award winner for Lifetime Achievement in Pioneering Inclusive Cultures. I've done that throughout my working life with all sorts of organizations to build high performance, great customer service, race and gender equality, and so on and so forth. And I just love working with organizations to do that. Thank you.
Brilliant. And welcome back, Ian. Nice to see you again. Thanks. Jackie Hartwell.
Hello, I'm Jackie. I work at IOP Publishing, and I'm the head of HR and talent. And Tom, you asked how we were feeling. I kind of shift between feeling overwhelmed and optimistic. And I'm quite excited at the moment because we're doing quite a lot at IOPP to shift our culture. You know, we've been quite a conservative with small c company. And, you know, we're really moving to being much more progressive and understanding what it's, you know, actually what's required as an employer for this generation. And I mean, this generation of workforce, which is quite a broad spectrum of ages and backgrounds. So yeah, as I stand here today, I'm feeling optimistic.
Fantastic. And you're really welcome. Really welcome, Jackie. Janet Houlis.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, I'm Janet Houlis. I am the founder of Velo Consultancy, and we work with our clients in developing change management, EDI, and strategies and business transformation strategies as well. How I'm feeling, very positive, a feeling of there's, no matter how much progress is being made, there's always more to be done. So I'm just constantly feeling that I just want to learn more, do more, so that I can serve better.
Fantastic. What a great mindset. Thank you. Joseph, please. Joseph Mullings.
Hi, yeah, my name's Joseph Mullings. I am a corporate social responsibility manager for a company called ISS Facility Services. I started with them in the UK. I'm now based in their US division. I turned up to a session you did last month, and Raggi really stirred that session and got me interested. So I'm here today. I am cautiously optimistic. That's how I'm feeling.
I hope you got a new notebook. You filled the last one, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I'm at the beginning of the new one.
Great. Julianne, please.
Hi everybody, I'm Julianne. I am the UK Diversity, Inclusion and Wellbeing Lead for a city law firm. I'm absolutely firefighting. I was out last week on a development course and my emails are just all over the place, but I'm delighted to be here, and actually it couldn't have happened on a better day because I know spending this time together with a group like this is going to lift my spirit.
Brilliant, thank you. Layla?
Hi everyone, I'm Layla. I run Diverse Minds, which is all about training, consultancy and coaching on mental health and wellbeing and race equality. I'm feeling reflective today. It's really lovely to be a participant and not delivering, and really looking forward to hearing Raggi talk and having a different perspective to mine, which is very workplace based, a much more social justice model.
Great, thank you. Lorna, please.
Hi, everybody. So it's Lorna Shaw. Apologies for not putting my camera on. I'm actually in the offices of a client, so my apologies for not doing that. It's great to be here. I work as a leadership and team coach. I have my own coaching practice with a focus on inclusive leadership. It's great to be here and certainly looking forward to hearing Raggi speak. It's a challenge to think about how I'm feeling because on the one hand, slightly optimistic, but on the other hand, a bit concerned that the energies that we saw last year, certainly around tackling racism, is slowly dissipating. And so I'm feeling a little bit, not quite despondent, but certainly concerned about where this agenda is going.
Thank you, Lorna. I honor that feeling. Manish, please. Okay, I'll come back to Manish. Pam.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I am from Chevron. I'm here in Houston, Texas. First of all, I'm really excited because both the temperature and the humidity are less than 90. Yay. And I'm involved with the global diversity team for the Supply and Trading Organization. I've also been involved with the MARC and Elevate programs that Catalyst puts on. And I'm a very active member in our Pride Network. So it's really good to see you all again. Thanks.
You are so welcome. We've really missed you.
You too.
Thank you. Sam, please.
Oh, wait, there we go. Hey, I'm Sam. I work in the finance department for IOP Publishing, and I'm also on the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion steering committee with Jackie. I'm feeling a little bit poorly, hence this giant mug of Lemsip. But generally, I think also, yeah, like Laura and Joseph said, like cautiously optimistic, but veering towards optimistic. So yeah, still happy to hear and see what people say.
Thank you. You're welcome. Sherry, please.
Hi, everyone. I could shut my curtains, but I really don't want to because the sun is so beautiful coming on me. So I know I've got a funny view. I'm the UK Diversity and Inclusion Director at Page Group, better known by one of our brands, Michael Page. Probably we're a recruitment company. It's funny, everybody automatically talked about business, didn't they, when they said how are they feeling a little bit? And I suppose I've got two answers. So I'm feeling encouraged, I would say, because I feel like the world has woken up to D&I a bit more in the last 18 months. Okay, granted, perhaps not from a good cause, but at least they've woken up to it. So I do believe change is happening. And from a personal perspective, I feel like I'm winning. I'm not going to lie. My kids went off in their Halloween costumes this morning. And after a panic when Amazon did not provide what I needed, we had to do a little bit creativity. And the creative version of myself is not one I'm very acquainted with. And but she stepped up and I sent off two kids very happy in their Halloween costumes this morning.
Brilliant. Thank you. We'll celebrate with you. Simon, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Simon and I'm the head of D&I for CDC Group. So we are the UK's development finance institution. Some of you might have seen me on previous calls. I used to be head of D&I at Royal London until relatively recently. I'm feeling curious, and also I just wanted to say to Pam, just say hello to Houston for me. My husband and I normally are over there each year working. Well, he works, I come on holiday, but we love Houston. Have many friends there. And I'm sorry Manish wasn't able to speak up, because I know he said he was ex-Navy, or he's in the Navy. I'm ex-Navy. I say I'm curious, but I'm also excited, and I have to say I share Lorna's slight concerns about how maybe things haven't kept their momentum going since last summer.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Talia.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Talia. I work with Julianne in the D&I team of an international law firm. I'm really excited to be here. I haven't been to a dialogue in a while. I mean, I'm so busy, I don't even really know how I feel, but I know that Raggi is going to be amazing. She's going to keep it real. And it's really good to see some people that I haven't seen in a while and meet new people here.
Brilliant. Thanks, Talia. Jane Saul Patterson.
Oh, hi, hello. So I'm a coach and facilitator, and I'm feeling encouraged by events like this. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Raggi says, and I like curious about the title, Challenging the Dynamics of Racism. I would say that I read some stats this morning, which are which I've read stuff like this before, but across all key metrics, the racism that is still there is actually still very depressing. But as I said, I am encouraged by events like this and the joint and collaborative effort it needs to take to tackle some of these issues around racism.
Great, Jane, thank you. Mary Gregory.
Hello, so this is my first attendance at one of these events, and I'm very much looking forward to it, and I'm curious and excited about it. And I'm also an independent coach and facilitator. I do a lot of work with women leaders, actually, and I'm passionate about trying to make a difference in the world and create the world as a much more inclusive place. And I have a weekly LinkedIn, Facebook Live conversation that I run with leaders called Lessons in Leadership, and I recently interviewed Shireen Daniels, who is known as the HR conversationalist, but she's very hot on the whole subject of racism. That's what she stands for. And I found myself getting really emotional in the conversation with her, because it felt like, here's me, woman on the street, white woman, I've got a mixed race daughter, I want to do something about this. How can we tackle this issue? And we discussed the whole systemic element of it. I mean, Shireen is just incredible. But when I saw this come round as a conversation piece, and then watched YouTube, Raggi, you and Tom having that conversation, I just thought, I need to keep building my awareness and educating myself, and also seeing how can I personally make a difference here. And I think understanding the dynamics of the system, to me, is really crucial in that. So
great, thank you, Mary. Thank you. I've got an M. Jones. No? Manish, are you able to speak now? Edward, part of our team.
Yeah, that'd be me. Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. Nice to hear you. I don't know. I'm just going from one thing to the next. And today I went from putting up shelves to coming to see Raggi, which I've desperately want to finish my shelves, but I wanted to be here even more. So I don't know how that's going to happen, but I'm just very interested in the subject and this dialogue format. So thanks.
Thanks, Edward. It's good to see you again. Roxy.
Hello from very sunny Brighton today. I'm, depending on which day of the week you catch me, Serenity and Leadership COO, Hoffman Process Facilitator, and Humanist Wedding Celebrant, amongst various other things. So I am feeling a kind of excitement mixed with anxiety. I think I've probably been drinking a bit too much coffee this morning, so I can really feel that in me, feel a bit disconnected from my body. But other than that, I'm excited and up for hearing Raggi speak.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we'll go on from here. And just before I introduce Raggi, what I'd just like to say is a short commercial. We do support organizations and their leadership teams. So if anybody has an interest, email Roxy if you've got her email, or just use our general one, hello@Serenity and Leadership. We have a LinkedIn community for networking. A number of people from the last dialogue joined. Do join that and continue the conversations as they come up. It's called Responsible Power and Open Dialogue, and you'll find the details in the chat, and if you need them later, then we put out an email to everybody asking for feedback, so you'll get the link then. When you get the email, do please, if you've got a moment, complete the feedback form. It makes a lot of difference to us so that we can understand how these are working for you and whether we can improve them in any way, or how we can improve them in any way. And just to say, next month, the event is on the 18th of November, and it'll be me speaking on bullying and harassment and looking at how that's an abuse of power. Again, we're experimenting with timing, so that one will be at 4 o'clock in the afternoon rather than the 2 o'clock that we've got today. I hope that will work for most people. You never know with these things. So, Raggi now. I'd like to introduce our speaker. Raggi's a race educator who identifies as a South Asian, queer, cisgendered woman. She's a human rights barrister with more than 20 years experience. She's focused on challenging issues of racism, gender violence, and mental health through law, social action, and policy. She has a long history of anti-oppression work and has been involved with the setup and running of numerous groundbreaking and award-winning projects. Raggi, as you've already heard, we're really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. The stage is yours. Over to you.
Thank you, Tom. I need to put everyone on gallery. Yeah, there you are. I notice there's a lot of anxiety in my system, right? And I'm really, as we've been doing the introductions, I've been really wondering why I'm feeling so anxious, because I talk about racism all the time. I facilitate, I train, I hold dialogue spaces, I write, right? I live and breathe and dream talking about racism, right? Why do I feel so anxious now, right? So I'm wondering, first of all, is it all mine? Maybe a lot of it is what's happening in the room. Maybe a lot of you are feeling that already. Roxy, you just talked about that. So maybe I'm just holding what's in the space. And maybe also it's the challenge of talking about challenging the dynamics of racism in 15 minutes. Right? How do we do that? Right? So I'm like, I've tried to kind of think in so many ways how I can make this punchy and change you all and shift all the dynamics, knowing that in this room there's so much brilliance already, there's so much awareness, there's people that are running these issues all over the place, there's DEI experts, etc. So how do I address this in a way that's impactful? So I really hope that I get that right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just talk a little bit about my story, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the dynamics that I experience, just very briefly, and some of the gaps that I see, and just leave you to talk about those gaps. I'm going to be looking down here quite a lot because that's where my iPad is with my notes, right? So for us to challenge the dynamics of racism, right, it requires all of us to show up, okay? It's not just about people like me showing up and shifting these dynamics by education. It requires all of us to recognize that these dynamics impact all of us. We're all socialized and conditioned around the dynamics of racism, and it requires all of us to show up to bring the change that we want to see, yeah? I was born in 1968, right? I grew up in North London suburbs. It was a very white area. When I went to, we were probably one of the only Asian families, right? And 1968 was an important year because it was the year that a man called Enoch Powell, who was a Conservative MP, and I see nods already in the room, did a speech called the Rivers of Blood speech, right? He spoke to a group of Conservative politicians, and he was very right-wing, and he spoke out against what he saw as mass migration. The citizens from the Commonwealth, who were made up of those that were previously colonized, were British through legislation and were allowed to come to the UK. So there'd been huge levels of migration in the 50s and in the early 60s. So he spoke a lot about that, and he spoke very strongly against the anti-racism legislation that was coming into force. It was the Race Relations Act of 1968, right? And there was a massive kind of outcry following his speech. Okay, it got a lot of press. Everybody was talking about racism, and it led to a massive explosion of racism in the UK. Yeah, I'm mostly talking about the UK. And how did that play out, right? I'm born then, right? By the time I hit primary school, early primary school, I'm experiencing and witnessing racism, right? And that just increased and increased as I went through primary school. By the time I get to early secondary school, I can't get to the end of my road without somebody calling me Packy, right? Every day somebody's chasing me, somebody's trying to attack me. It was a regular daily experience. And as I say this, even though I've talked about my story so many times, I can feel the dizziness and fizziness in my system, which is the trauma response, right? And it's also probably what's happening in the room, in everybody's bodies. So let's take a breath. By the time I was leaving secondary school, things shifted. Things started to shift for me personally. And as I was going to college and starting out in work, things really started to shift. And what I know now from my political awareness now is that there was a massive rise up of different communities. Black and Asian communities came together. They went out onto the streets and they really protested strongly, and they challenged the racism that they were experiencing, right? At the same time, the younger generation were coming through who had grown up living amongst people from different communities and who started to say no. And we really experienced a change in the UK about what was okay and what was not okay. And at that stage, it was no longer okay to be openly, blatantly racist, overtly racist. And so personally, my experiences really changed in the world, right? But we never addressed the reasoning and the socialization and the conditioning that led to all of that racism. We just created a system where it was no longer okay to be openly racist. So the behaviors and the thoughts and the ideas were still there, but they became hidden, right? And racism continued, but in a more covert way. And as I was growing up, I remember people, saying to me, yeah, things have changed, right? But the stories of the racism that we experienced were still huge, right? And people were saying, at least we knew where it was before. At least it was blatant and we can see it. And now, although it's insidious, we can't see it, and therefore it's harder to challenge, right? By the age of 30, I became a barrister. I became a human rights barrister. And oh my God, that was such a cool time, right? I was a political lawyer, and I was an immigration and asylum lawyer, and I got taken on in the top political set. And I remember when I got pupillage, am I all right on time, Tom? Yeah, give me like a 3-minute warning or something, right? I remember when I got pupillage, right? I was at law school at the time, and I went to one of the poshest law schools, thinking I needed to be there to have the name in order to make it in law, right? And somebody came up to me and said, wow, I've never met anyone who hasn't been to public school before. And I was like, yeah, there's only like 2 of us here, right? And in my class, only 2 of us got pupillage, and I was one of them. And there was this whole conversation saying, you can tell the system's really fucked up if Raggi got pupillage and we didn't. But of course, I got taken on in the top political set because I was great. I was really good, and I was really political, and I really showed up, and I deserved it, right? My experiences in early law were horrific, right? They were really horrific. The racism was so huge, right? But everybody had this idea that we're fighting for justice. We're not about racism. The world has changed. But really, for people that looked like me, it hadn't really changed that much at all. Yeah. So I think I just want to set that as a framework, right? Now I spend all of my time talking about race, right? I'm training, right? I do a lot of work with lawyers. I do a lot of work in charities and businesses. I hold dialogue spaces. I coach, I facilitate, right? I'm in conversations on race all the time. And I think what I want to do is I want to talk about a couple of the dynamics that I come across. First of all, I talk to the wider group, and I also do a lot of work with people that look like me, right? Racialized people, Black and brown, right? And the stories that I hear are really similar across the board, right? Experiences and experiences of racism, right? It may not be blatant, being called the N-word or being called a packy, or, you know, all of these horrible things that we used to experience. It may not be like that, right? But we're being spoken over at meetings. We're being asked to join panels in order to have a brown face on. We're not being promoted. We're not being invited to, you know, to join, you know, to go for a drink, or, you know, there's just so many different dynamics that play out that impact us, right? And what I hear from people that look like me is just a huge level of trauma and distress and upset, and that these dynamics continue to play out again and again and again, right? And then when I talk to the organizations, well, everybody shifted, right? Woohoo! George Floyd got killed and everybody's understood that we have to challenge racism. And I am so grateful, right? I really do mean that. I'm really grateful that people are showing up and that they want to do the work. And I really believe that there's a lot of good intent there. But when you talk to them, it's like, yeah, we know that there's these dynamics, but it's not here. I don't hold these dynamics. It's not me. I don't think like that. It's not my team. It's not my organization. It's not here. It's out there, but it's not here. What we need is we need to get more Black and brown people coming into the organization. They don't apply to us, right? I don't know why that is. We need to get more Black and brown people coming in. We need them at a senior level. We need to create the dynamics where we can promote them. We want all of that. But racism, it's not really us. It's all out there, despite the fact that all the Black and brown staff are saying it's really problematic, right? So there's this gap, right? What we say, what we experience, and what the organizations experience, right? What is it that creates that gap? What is it that stops us from recognizing that we're all socialized and conditioned in the dynamics of racism, right? Probably every one of us in this room has racist thoughts and pretends that you don't. And this is the point where I see a couple of nods and most people in the room normally go, right? Yes, I am talking about you looking down, right? I know that you get racist thoughts because I get them. Okay, I've had to do a huge amount of work about my anti-Blackness. There's huge levels of racism against Black communities in my community, my South Asian community. Right. Thank you, Lola. I see that you put a heart up, right? And I can just feel that fizziness again, right? So, and also I've held so many sessions, right? And I know what's in the room, right? Now, the majority of our communication is non-verbal, right? There's some of you in this room that know much more about this than I do, but from the research that I've looked at, the reports show that between 55 and 93% of our communication is non-verbal. I don't know why there's such a difference. I think it's the parameters of the report. So it comes out in eye contact, tone of voice, body movements, it comes out in your behaviors, right? So your conditioning, your socialization and conditioning, that socialization and conditioning, and we could break that down if we had more time, but it's what's leading to those racist thoughts, right? Leaks. So the more you shove it down, the more it leaks, right? Because the majority of your communication is non-verbal and therefore unconscious. So that conditioning is all coming out. So people like me, right, we have very highly tuned bullshit detectors, because we've been living around the dynamics of racism all our lives, right? And the people of color in the room know what I'm talking about. The women know what I'm talking about. The queers know what I'm talking about, right? And so you think that it's not us, it's out there, and you're being very polite and speaking very nicely, and we're like, yeah, I see what you're doing right now, right? Or and it's people in this room that have also been responsible for some of these dynamics that I've experienced, right? Where I've been in spaces with you, where you've invited me into places where you've talked over me, you haven't really listened to what I've got to say, and you're recreating those dynamics, right? It happens regularly all the time, and it's all of us, right? So what is that gap about? What does it take for us to show up? What does it take to create the dynamics around us, for us, where we can create learning spaces that are non-judgmental, where we can talk about these issues? It's really tough talking about these issues. I really know that for many of you, there's a real fear, right? What can we do to create the systems and the spaces where we can look at these dynamics, where we can change these dynamics, where we're willing to show up, where we're willing to recognize this, right? It's about being compassionate, creating good learning experiences so that people can grow. But then what you do is what happens, the last point is what happens is when people do start to grow, there's that initial gap. Then when people do start to grow and start to recognize what's going on, there's a huge gap between there and action, right? Action where you show up, where you bring change, where you challenge the dynamics, right? Where you speak out, right? I'm in the middle of this really intense program at the moment. We were talking about this yesterday, and we've done weeks and weeks of work, and still there's so much freeze. We all have trauma in our systems, not just people that look like me. White people also have a lot of trauma around these dynamics, right? So we have to create trauma-informed spaces to do the work. But what is it that is in the way of us showing up and doing the work? What creates these disparities in levels of awareness? What is it that means that where it means that it's not us, it's them, it's always somebody else? And what is it that stops us taking action? Those are my questions to you. Thank you. How am I for time, Tom?
You've got 30 seconds if you want to. Well done. Thank you very much. You've really seeded thoughts for the dialogue. So I've allocated everyone a room. Hopefully it all works. If there's a problem, come back into the main room. And the purpose of this, just take 15 seconds just to introduce yourself if you don't know the person already, and then take a minute, just 60 seconds each, to reflect on what have you heard and what's coming up for you before we go into the dialogue, and then I'll bring you all back. Okay, off we go.
We were all cut off in our prime.
Yes.
I'm
Time
sorry
was too
about
short.
I just want to say a huge sorry to Sam. Poor thing. I didn't even give him a chance to speak. So my sincerest apology.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So welcome back. So dialogue, some of you are very familiar with this, others it's new. The principle really of the way that we work is if you imagine that, and if you can do this, imagine that we're all sitting in a circle. There is no hierarchy in that, and I don't know about you, but I feel really comfortable in a circle because it feels like I'm really going back to the roots of us as a species. We've always gathered, often around a fire, to talk. And so I really invite you, when you speak to the center. Don't speak to someone else. Speak to put what you're feeling and thinking into the center. And it's a space not to have a conversation, but to be able to reflect on what you've heard, how it's impacted you, and come from a sense of awareness of your intention to speak. So I'm really encouraging that sense of listening and also intentionality. So some principles: we treat each other with kindness and respect. We listen with compassion and curiosity, and we notice when these fade into a reaction, and then we hold that before we speak. We honor each other's unique ways of to understanding, and we don't presume to advise, to fix, or to save one another. We hold all stories that are shared in the circle as confidential. And we trust that each of us has the guidance we need within us, and we rely on the power of silence to access that. So having said all that, and you've had your very brief breakout rooms, I now I'll just open the floor. If you need to put your hand up, you know, you've got the system on Zoom, but really I invite people just to fill the space when it's right. And hopefully we'll get a flow there. If you put your hand up, it means I've got to interfere, and I'd rather not do that. So the floor is open.
Hi, I'd like to sort of ask about the gap that really struck me about things changed for Raggi, and then there wasn't really a conversation as to why. And in the US, and particularly in Texas, we have a great suppression of trying to educate and trying to fill that gap, and it's so frustrating. We have voter suppression, we have all this, and so I'm very well aware that until we really dig deep and try to understand how we got to where we are, there's nothing that will get us to where we need to be. And so that was what really struck me about that part of the conversation.
I think what actually struck me is the lack of progress we made on this issue. You only need to look at me to see that I'm not all that young. So I've been around for quite a long time. One of the things that I think is necessary to make progress, and I seldom hear this mentioned in relation to race, and that is that each organization needs to build an inclusive culture where each person is valued and respected. Well, that seemed a showstopper.
What does that mean, Ian? You know, it's a big thing you've said there, to build an inclusive culture, but probably easier said than done. I'm interested in understanding what that looks like.
Well, I mean, it means that you have to have a vision of future success with an inclusive culture. It means that all the managers need to be trained to be inclusive leaders, and there needs to be an understanding of what are the basic features of an inclusive culture.
I agree with what you're saying, Ian. There's my, I don't know, frustration and cynicism about how through many years of working in public sector, university organizations, and all the training around inclusion and inclusive cultures, and although that is more language that's been used in the last few years, but I just feel like I've sat in on so many sessions around race, racism. I've spoken with many other Black and brown people, and those experiences, you know, hearing them for years, and yet knowing that the organizations I'm in have this positive intention, which they do, you know, public sector organizations, universities. And it seems like one initiative after another, and it's that how we move to action, how, you know, what Raggi was saying is that, you know, maybe there's greater awareness on some levels, but yet I don't know what's going to make the change. I want to be part of that change. And I do understand the conversations like this can be part of change, but how it really works, I don't know.
Well, I think one of the problems is that people talk, organizations talk about having an inclusive culture, but building an inclusive culture means bringing about major change in the way people behave and think. And therefore it needs a clear strategy to build an inclusive culture, which has to be led from the top.
Apologies if I didn't speak to the fire just by challenging that comment there. But I guess what's in my, and I hear what's being said. it is about people, right? It's you can change the numbers of minorities you have, but it's like what I'm thinking. Thank you for helping me to breathe, Raggi. Because what I feel is needed is sort of Raggi to sort of waterboard everybody with this type of approach. Just like get us in deep, because until we're challenged on a very personal, emotional level. I was speaking with Mary, and she was saying how she got emotional talking to Shireen. Like, I think if you can't bring somebody where they feel something, you're just putting policies in place. So I love what we're doing here.
I've just put my UK MD in a very difficult position today, and I did it with lots of apprehension and lots of nerves. So we did a webinar this morning for Black History Month, which consisted of two Black people, one Black male, one Black female, senior in the workplace, a senior inclusion lady who's white, and then our UK MD who's a white man. And it was the right thing to put him on there because we wanted to put across that kind of side of being a senior leader who are often white and male, and what their role is in helping change the landscape. And he did it, and he said he'd do it, which I was grateful for. Inside, I was in turmoil because I was thinking, oh gosh, you don't get this yet. He's not new to the business, but he's new in post. And I would go so far to say he's probably been a little bit of one of the resistors up until now. So I was kind of like, but all I could think was, if I can get him to do this, and I gave him some very clear, direction in regards to things to read, how honest he can be, that he's obviously far from being there, but also that he is in an all-white boardroom and actually what that means. And then I said, I think if I can get him to do this, he will learn so much for the people he's on the panel with, that this is about pushing him into the discomfort, and this is about how we get him to move past that. And he was brilliant. He really outdid himself, and I was so proud of him, because I thought, you know what, you've taken everything on board that I've said, you've pushed yourself, you've thought about the things that we've already enabled for you in regards to reverse mentoring and so on. And actually, he just took the time to realize, and to your, I know you're not supposed to refer, but as someone just said, how do you get it to ignite for them? How do you get them to relate to it? And we're far from done with him, obviously, but it was a really big step today. And I think that's why I said I was encouraged at the beginning, because when you start to see progress, as little as it might be, and it only being a very small cog in a wheel, it was good. So push them for the discomfort, push them into that place of discomfort, because otherwise they're never going to move forward.
Yeah, I kind of felt like last year with George Floyd, the thing that was really weird for me was like, I wasn't ever really aware of how many white people weren't conscious of the fact that there's like loads of racism happening all the time. And that was very strange, because I just kind of assumed that everybody understood that and lived in that reality that I did. And the only reason I think I've been conscious of that is because my dad is Algerian. He's a brown man who speaks with a foreign accent. So from when I was a kid, you're walking down the street, people think that I've been kidnapped, I don't know, so there's that's always been very conscious. Like, race means something, like if you're foreign, it means something. If you have a foreign accent, it means something. And especially a foreign accent where it's not an American accent or something, people think, oh, this person can't speak English, or perhaps they're a bit stupid, perhaps they're not, that. So I've always had that. I just kind of assumed other people understood that. And so I was really surprised when there was all this, we did some good forums internally, and people were asking questions, and people were saying, oh my God, it's so terrible, there's so much prejudice around. And it's like, yeah, obviously, did you not get this? So where I'm at now, and I went on the same kind of journey last year as well. Like, I did read a lot more stuff, listen to some great podcasts, and I sort of feel at this point, like, yes, I feel very depressed about the entire situation, but I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for businesses. Some of the really good things we're doing, like looking at data, really having data around things like ethnic minority representation at different levels, really tracking that, we did a really good session as well in December. We put a survey out to everyone in the UK and said, tell us about your experiences of racism and microaggressions at our firm in the UK. So nobody could wiggle out and say, oh yes, 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 but you know, this doesn't happen here because we somehow live in a vacuum in this firm, which we obviously don't. We live in the real world. And that was really powerful because we had senior people reading those stories out. And when we did the prep sessions for that and we shared, you know, what people experienced, and, you know, nothing groundbreaking, like I get asked for my ID pass when I'm in the lift or when I'm on different floors. And I think it's probably because I'm Black, you know, and people looking at that and being like, oh my God, does that happen? That never happens to me. And it's like, yeah, obviously, you know, like that's the world that Black and brown people live in, you know. And it was really good because those senior leaders were like, shit, we didn't realize, you know, the extent of this. And we shared that with, you know, anybody who wanted to come along, and we had really good attendance for that. And I do think that even if people are kind of like it's somewhere in the back of their minds, I do think there is a bit more awareness of what the problems are. And then obviously you're coming up to this barrier of like, oh God, it's actually such a big issue and it's everywhere. What do we do? Or I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Or, you know, and then the kind of there's indifference, of course. And then I think there's less insidious things like somebody doesn't get given work or gets passed over for promotion. And I think sometimes that's just because people are poor people managers or whatever else it might be. But I do feel like I feel a little bit optimistic when, you know, when we're looking at things like the data and stuff, we're really going to be able to track this. And then it's just a case of really being able to kind of, I guess, back people up against a wall and say, you said you wanted to do X, Y, Z, the numbers show this, or they don't show this, or our survey shows this. What are we going to do about it? And getting that data and like really understanding your industry and your company, maybe that's the way to kind of push the, you know, move the dial more.
I think I'm torn in all of this. So listening to Raggi talk and just thinking about the pace of change. I mean, you know, Ian, various others have been doing this for a very long time, and it feels sometimes that we sort of take 2 paces forward and then we take a pace backwards. I think we're not direct enough. I think that, talking with Sherry in our brief one-to-one, I think this thing about we really need to be direct. And Sherry used the phrase, you know, if we're not, then we're getting in the way of our own progress, which I thought was such a concise way of putting it. But this 2 paces forward, 1 pace back thing is, you know, I said about how I was feeling in the beginning. The summer of 2021 was a lot of us thought was going to really change things. And sorry, of 2020, not 2021. I've lost track of time this last 2 years. Anyway, summer 2020 I thought would really start to change things. And instead I saw happen here what I've seen happen previously in the US, which is that as a movement starts to gain traction, there's a real kickback from some sectors, some of it the establishment, some of it not the establishment, but organizations and people that want to not have the status quo challenged. And so, watching Colston's statue get thrown into Bristol Harbour was a highlight for me last year. And then watching the treatment of Marcus Rashford and the rest of the players in the Euros in the finals was a massive, massive letdown. And then seeing, and I'll get political here, seeing government ministers not understand that the person they spoke to wasn't a black professional Premier footballer, but was actually a black professional Premiership rugby player with a different name and a different background and a different face and all the rest of it. That is just so depressing. And I worry. I think, as from a purely personal perspective, I think there's stuff I can do, and I know I'm not, far from innocent in all of this. But then when I look at what businesses can do, I think, that there's more needs to be done. I think we need to, senior leaders really need to step up and take ownership of some of this, and we can help them on that journey, but they have to be held to account. The lack of movement of people of colour into senior positions in British businesses is disgraceful, and something needs to be done. And if organisations don't do something about it, they're going to be overwhelmed by demographic change, because young people who are black or brown are going to come into organisations. They're going to look up the line. They're going to see nothing has changed, and they're going to leave. And talent is going to hemorrhage elsewhere, and that just feels like a ridiculous situation to be in. But then going back to the sort of the way things have gone, particularly in America, I think there are movements out there now. So I'm thinking of some of the accountability projects, which are starting to look at companies and organisations that are funding through the back door people or bodies who are definitely racist, who are definitely homophobic, who are definitely anti-women's rights, but who are pouring money into political action committees, and thinking they can get away with it, and they have to be held to account. I think there's something needs to be done in a sort of social movement that says that this is just not acceptable. I suppose if I had an ambition for where we were when it comes to racism in this country, I think, and this is a particularly UK thing because I think it works, is I think it has to be no longer socially acceptable. We have managed to do a lot about things like drink driving in this country through social shaming. And I think that is a route. At the moment, there are some people out here who seem to be proud of their racism. They're proud of their populist stance. And I think we have to come to a place where that is no longer socially acceptable. Because that seems to be the one thing that Brits care about.
I think in many areas that overt racism is unacceptable, and we only had to see what happened after the Euros to see the sort of body of support for those young black men. What I want to think about is how do we create I heard Raggi say these words, how do you create the learning spaces which are non-judgmental and make compassionate spaces? So I'm thinking about leaders now. I'm thinking about leaders, how do you create those spaces? And one thing that came up for me was remembering about a book I read years ago, Joseph Jaworski, who was talking about having these sort of really diverse conversations with real diversity of people, that actually in organizations, I don't know if they're doing that. I don't know whether they are working with communities. I'm talking corporate organizations here. I don't know if they're having dialogues to really look at some of the solutions going forward. But I think that's one of the things that can happen. And maybe sponsorship is the other thing as well within organizations, whether there's a need for more active allies as sponsors supporting Black and brown people through the different levels of an organisation.
One of the things that I would say in terms of sort of creating environments and things like that is that I think we've talked about the Euros a little bit, and it highlights to me the danger of sort of hitching a wagon to events and single instances and things like that. Because obviously, we've got, so throughout October, we've got Black History Month, and it gives us an opportunity to really shine spotlights on issues like this. But with things like the Euros, there was the bit of optimism as we were going through, where obviously we had quite a diverse team. There were sort of the team was sort of very socially conscious and proactively promoting socially conscious messages and things like that. And then as soon as it went sour, the tide turned. All of the racists came out of the woodwork, and what seemed like it was going to be a beautiful opportunity to move the cause forward, then sort of took several steps back. Obviously, sure, you won't be able to tell at all from the accent. I'm a northerner, and we across the river from me, our great rivals in Newcastle. Obviously, there's just been a really high-profile takeover of the club by a Saudi consortium, which is obviously has its own contentiousness, but in general is sort of in an area where we are, you know, infamous for not necessarily having the most cosmopolitan of makeups and outsets and things like that, should be an opportunity to have education and to improve relationships and improve awareness and things like that. And as soon as Newcastle Football Club gets relegated, which will happen, as speakers of Mackham from down south of the river, that positivity, that wave of positivity that we're riding at the moment will turn negative. And I'm watching it going, this could be such a great opportunity, but I'm getting that fear that we were talking about at the beginning of the session of, I can see how this is going to go. So when it comes to creating environments and things like that, I think the sustainability of creating that kind of culture rather than hitching your wagon, as I say, to like a particular event or a particular month and things like that is probably so important.
I think the biggest challenge is the government that we've got. What kind of role in the UK and what kind of role modelling do we have? We have rhetoric around, if you're left wing, you wear a mask, if you're right wing, you don't wear a mask, because the green bug won't jump up and get you. From that to who they put in charge of the race, and I'm laughing because you all know why, the race equality, race disparity report. And for me, so it means that it's almost up to workplaces, and I think there are workplaces who really care, there are workplaces who are indifferent, and then there are workplaces who are like, well, there's a skills shortage and we can just, doesn't matter what experience people have. And I do think that because of the situation we're in politically, and there's a global issue as well around this in various countries, that things have just gone backward.
There's something for me about when we're thinking about organisations and thinking about my own organisation is sort of what I call sort of window dressing. And I think there's real value in programmes to help our people from ethnic minority backgrounds sort of more effectively navigate the culture in which we work. But what we need to do is change the culture in which we work and change the dominant culture. And I think it was Simon earlier who talked about accountability, because that's the thing for me that's missing. So Talia and I worked together, and I was listening to her earlier, and I was like, I do like working with Talia because she's much more optimistic than me. So she sort of perked me up a little bit. But until we can run all the programs that we wish, but until we change the mindset of the dominant culture, we're just not going to have the change that we need. We've done a lot of work at my firm over the last sort of decade in terms of bringing in a lot more ethnically diverse people, and they don't stay as long. They're more likely to leave. They don't progress as quickly as their white counterparts, and that's a decade, and the culture hasn't really shifted that much in the decade. So sorry, I'm a bit of a Debbie Downer, because sometimes it just feels so impossible. Yeah, sorry.
I think I'm with you, Julie, Anne, on that. I mean, I find it hard not to go into despair around it. And there is something around, not going into victim. How can I take some power here and make a difference? And I've been paralleling as I've been listening, because I do lots of work with women leaders, so it's not so much about race, but similarly with women, getting the gender balance going is equally been a challenge. And you make progress and you think, oh yeah, there are more women on boards than there have ever been before, and then later on next year suddenly there's less. And it does feel like that, as I think Simon was saying earlier, 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. It's constant. And so that suggests to me that there's something missing in how we're approaching it. And I mean, it could be related to what Ian said right at the beginning about start at the top. I don't know whether it is start at the top. It is a systemic issue. And how do we shift? What is the simplest thing in the system we could shift? that would really make a difference to this, a sustainable difference. And there's something resonating for me as well around, I'm not so sure about shaming people, because what I see has happened is it's great that you know, it's not okay to be racist anymore, and you get frowned upon, but it's almost made the conversation covert rather than overt. It's kind of gone underground. It hasn't got rid of the conversation. It's still going on for a certain sector of society. How do we come together to solve this? Those people that, you know, how do we get people so when Raggi does a session, people don't go, oh, of course, I'm not racist, that people actually say, yeah, actually, I do have racist thoughts. And it's okay to admit that, so that we can open up the dialogue. Whereas at the moment, it feels like people are in denial around it. And how do we need to break through that defense mechanism, I guess.
Just to say,
I want to go back to building an inclusive culture. And when I was a young man, I was made HR director of a large chemical factory in the north of England. It belonged to ICI, which was then the largest chemical group in the world. And it had awful employee relations, awful productivity, and was in danger of closing. And I did what my predecessors had done. I worked with the managers to try and change things. We didn't make any progress. Then one night I was driving home after a particularly gruesome day, and I grew up on a council estate, and I was thinking, you know, when my mum and dad came home from work, they often used to spend time in the evening saying, if only our managers would do this, and if only our managers would do that. And then the next morning, I went to the factory director's office and I said, Bill, what we need to do here is to engage the whole of the workforce in making this the best factory in ICI. And we talked for a while, and he said, okay, and we'll do that, and you'll have to show us how to do it. But it was very, very lucky that Professor Dick Beckard was working with the board of ICI. And I was factioned in to Dick's meetings with the board around those, and he showed me what to do. And to cut a long story short, we built an inclusive culture. And then something very interesting started to happen. We started to bring in black people. There was a large African Caribbean population in Huddersfield. And prior to building an inclusive culture, we didn't have any. And then we started to recruit them. And what's more, they enjoyed working with us. Unfortunately, I then got promoted. And so the inclusive culture came to an end.
Thanks for that story. Just to say, we've got just 10 minutes or so to go. And in a minute, I'm going to ask people to start closing, and I'll get Raggi to sum up. But I know, Joseph, you wanted to say something. So just to say, if there's people who haven't spoken, this is the last chance. But go for it, Joseph.
Thanks. Back to Raggi's question about what makes us miss the gap, and I think what someone was just saying about, you know, what can we do? I feel like we might not really be visualizing properly where we need to get to. I think we're so activated by the visible evidences of racism, we just want to stamp them out. And in reality, I'm not sure we understand what that gap means for life chances for the people. So, for instance, being able to say, I have racist thoughts, what a great workshop that would be, because then that's the beginning of me saying, okay, I can acknowledge I have these, but I wonder how that might have played out in my decision-making when I was interviewing a group of people, or who I give a pay rise or promotion to. And for me, you know, Raggi mentioned, you know, the various traumas we often face in the workplace, whether you get invited to the rooftop for a fag or to the pub for a drink. Like personally, I don't really care whether you invite me to those places, but pay me properly, promote me if I deserve it. And, you know, this touchy-feely side of, oh, it's really bad for people to say such things. No, it's really bad that my life chances were adversely affected for a generation. You know, my father's from the Windrush generation. He was a builder. And Raggi, you talking about 68, it's a very important year for me as well, and for my family. in the UK, and just the dynamics of that culture, which was, you know, West Indians were there, yes, you know, and Irish people were like allies for us. And so my dad, being in the building trade, was able to get work, but even within that space, he'd never make foreman, right? So that's affected a whole generation. And so when we come into England, not having, you know, stable family backgrounds, going back to the legacy of slavery, we've had so much further a position to rise from. I think some of these things are not really understood. It's like, yeah, pull up your bootstraps. Raggi, you talked about the racism between Blacks and Asians. Yeah, we lived through that. We had names for each other as kids growing up. We heard it around the tables and so on and so forth. But I feel like now Gareth Southgate is an example of, like, this generation. Like, we've had Pakistani friends, we've had Indian friends, we've had a Nigerian friend, a Ghanaian friend, and we can cuss each other, and actually it's not that serious, because at the end of the day we understand what it means to win and working together to win. So there's so much progress that's taking place, but as others have said, there's still this legacy, and I feel like we don't understand that it's economic equity. I don't need you to like me, I don't need you to invite me around for dinner. We need economic equity. And that's part of what I wanted to say to the fire from Raggi's talk.
Absolutely. We talk a lot about reparations, and there's some different thoughts on what that means. But for me, it means trying to erase these deep inequities that have happened over decades and 100 years, you know, and yeah, you know, when you deny generation after generation the ability to own property, you know, their own home, to have opportunities in the workplace, it's a big hole to dig yourself out of. And so I think it's good that that conversation is being had, because I completely agree that, like me or don't like me, but boy howdy, let me get me on this level playing field, because it's been denied.
Raggi, I think what I'd like is if you would say your sort of conclusion piece now, and depending on how much space there is, we can, those that want to can close. Yeah, over to you.
I'm really moved by this conversation, right? When I'm in groups and people talk about being moved, I sometimes think, what are you actually talking about, right? And I now know, right? Because I'm feeling it, right? And at points of this conversation, there's been such an exhaustion and heaviness, right? And kind of, oh, it's all just all hopeless. And then there's been moments where the whole energy has shifted. What creates those dynamics? For me, what creates those dynamics, in me personally, are conversations like this, doing the work, showing up, having the discussions, right? I find these, you know, I feel really enthusiastic when I see the work being done. And this is the work, right? These conversations are the work, right? The one thing that I really noticed, despite the fact that I said that we're all socialized and conditioned in the dynamics of racism, and actually I've been in rooms with people in this room and I've experienced direct racism. Mostly there's been a couple of moments where we're coming close to it or naming things, but mostly what we've been doing is talking externally. What do we need to do in the organizations? What do we need to do out there? What about us taking accountability for ourselves? Yeah. Right? It starts with us. We are all socialized and conditioned. You know that you get those racist thoughts, right? And there's a whole load of learning that you can do about what happens around that and how that plays out, right? So actually we're part of the problem, all of us, but we never take responsibility for ourselves. It's always out there. And that's where the gap is in the organizations. It's not us, it's everybody out there. Until we can become humble enough to do the growing and the learning ourselves, right, and create the dynamics and the spaces where people can show up and do that learning, despite the fact that it's challenging, it's difficult, right, it's sticky, right, we're not going to bring that change, I don't think, right. The second thing I notice is most of what we're doing is we're looking towards the white people. Racism comes externally as dominance, and it comes internally as oppression. And a really big part of my work is, what do we do for the racialized folk, for the Black folks, to support them and build them up? Because we all suffer from huge levels of internalized oppression and from racism and trauma, etc. And we're always doing this work. Let's educate the white people. If they're just educated a bit more, it will be better. But what about building us up from our core? So actually, we do this work simultaneously so that we grow in the organizations, we grow with our own personal power, and what happens externally, one, either we challenge it or we're not so bothered, or or we can get to the positions where we can earn that money anyway, right? We do have to change the systems, absolutely, but I think within that, some of that impetus and money and development needs to go within us, right, and not just externally. I think that's all I want to say. There's a million things to say of what's coming in the room, right? I really believe in change. I see it, right? I believe in it. I think it's really challenging, but I think it requires all of us to be willing to get our hands dirty and see the dynamics in ourselves and create the conversations around us. And be part of those conversations rather than the good people, right? What Robin DiAngelo calls the good bad binary, right? We're the good ones. We're the ones that are bringing change, and all the bad people are all of those people, those bosses, all of these other good people who are trying to change. It's not just that. It's all of us. And for me, I spend a lot of my work challenging the dynamics of racism as they appear within me, not just, say, my anti-Blackness, but my internalized oppression. I've worked really hard of changing that, and that changes it from everyone around me, my communities around me, and in the places that I go in. And I can come in and I can speak from a heart space, right, which brings change. It was really important to hit people on an emotional level because I'm more empowered. And of course, it still deeply pains me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Raggi. We are just about out of time. Julianne, I'm always conscious of your needing to end on time. you're my regulator. we can go over, but if anybody wants to say something and needs to leave, now's your moment. And perhaps we'll go over a couple of minutes just to allow, but here, this is just for people to close. Don't make new points. How are you feeling as you leave? Say whatever you need to say just to complete.
I'm so disappointed that I've talked about building an inclusive culture, which I know does work, and yet no one has picked that up. It's been totally ignored.
Feeling love for Raggi. Thank you.
Mutual, Joseph.
Hi, sorry, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
I've been having problems on unmuting myself. Just wanted to say thank you so much for this. Just on a positive note, I grew up in East LA and saw a lot with Rodney King, etc., and relived that again with George Floyd. My daughter went to school the other day wearing her hair out in an afro, and I was afraid that people would touch her hair, that the teachers would call me. I see this day in, day out. I'm an investigator looking at issues like to do with harassment. She came back and she said, "Mum, do you think I would let them?" And I think sometimes we talk about tone from the top, but it's also the bang from the bottom. It's, the activism that we all need to have. And I really liked what was said today about that. Thank you.
Thank you for always making me learn. I always feel challenged coming to these sessions, and I really, really appreciate that. So thank you for hitting hard. because I think that's needed. Thank you.
I guess I'm just going away with a few things that give me sort of food for thought. I probably came across as overly negative earlier. I'm not actually quite as negative as I may have sounded, but I do think there are some things to think about in here, and I think that point about acknowledging our own accountability in this is important. And to Ian's point, I think, you know, the whole point around inclusive culture, I think, is actually what we're trying to build. And we have talked about, you know, changing the mindset in the dominant culture. I think it's critical that we do that. I just think that there's a lot under here to unpack that we have to get right before we're actually ever going to create that inclusive culture.
I just sort of feel like, well, it was my birthday this week and someone said to me, I was like, oh God, I'm 32. I don't want to be 32. And they said, well, if you're not getting older, you're dying, right? Or you're dead. So it sort of feels like that with D&I work. Like, you know, it's frustrating and you're always frustrated. But if you're not doing it, what are you going to do? You know, if you're not engaged in some kind of, I don't know, activism or this or whatever, you know, I think we all feel that from our hearts. And if you just kind of checked out and did some completely different job that didn't feed your soul in that way, then you'd also be pissed off still about how fucked up the world is. So that's kind of how I feel about it. That's my optimism to finish.
Okay, well, we'll draw it to a close then. Thank you very, very much, everybody. Thank you, Raggi.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and as you know, I've done your program, and it just left me at the end of it saying I need to do it again, because there's just so much unpeeling to do, and it just doesn't happen overnight. So thank you to all. Do join us next month when I'm going to be talking about bullying and harassment. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Raggi.
Bye.
Thank you.